Sir, stand up for me.
May I ask what this is about?
You've been reported as threatening crew.
I haven't threatened anyone.
He's been watching us the entire flight. He doesn't belong up here.
I have a ticket.
Turn around, hands behind your back, now.
At 35,000 feet over the North Atlantic, two federal air marshals pulled a black man out of seat 3A in first class, forced his arms behind his back, and cuffed him in front of every passenger in the cabin. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a threat. He hadn't touched a single person on that plane. The man was Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 16 years of Special Operations service, returning from a classified NATO briefing in Stuttgart, Germany. He was flying on official government travel orders, seated in first class because the Department of Defense had booked him there. The flight attendant who reported him, Karen Lockhart, stood near the galley curtain with her arms crossed, watching the marshals work. A passenger sitting across the aisle would later describe the look on her face as satisfaction. Lockhart had told the captain that Kirkwood was aggressive, erratic, and possibly dangerous. None of it was true. Every camera on that aircraft, every witness statement, and every marshal's report would confirm the same thing. He had done nothing. But by the time the plane touched down at Dulles, Kirkwood was walked off in handcuffs in front of 212 passengers, locked in a federal holding room, and left there for over 3 hours before anyone told him why. Within 72 hours, the FBI had opened a file. NCIS was involved. The Pentagon had sent a formal demand to the airline. And a chain of events was underway that would end careers, trigger a federal investigation, and cost Atlantic Pacific Airlines $6.5 million. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because what this flight attendant did and what happened to her afterward is something you need to see for yourself. Karen Lockhart was 44 years old and had been a senior flight attendant with Atlantic Pacific Airlines for 16 years. She bid exclusively on transatlantic first-class routes, and among crew who had worked with her, she was known by a nickname she had never been told to her face: the Gatekeeper. The name didn't come from nowhere. Over her career, 11 formal complaints had been filed against her by passengers of color. Black and brown travelers reported being asked to show boarding passes a second time after being seated. They described condescending language during meal service, drink orders skipped without explanation, and quiet suggestions that they might be more comfortable in economy. One complaint from a black attorney flying business class described Lockhart telling him that his seat assignment must be a system error and offering to reseat him before takeoff. Every one of those complaints had been reviewed internally and dismissed. Some were marked as misunderstandings, others were filed with no action taken at all. 2 HR supervisors had signed off on closing the cases without investigation. Lockhart had never been disciplined, never been retrained, never been pulled aside and told to change her behavior. To the airline, she was a reliable senior crew member with a clean record. To the passengers she targeted, she was something else entirely. Her junior partner on the Kirkwood flight was Colton Pruitt, 27, 2 years into the job and still on probation. Pruitt followed Lockhart's lead without question. He laughed when she laughed, agreed when she directed, and stayed silent when silence was easier than confrontation. That silence would cost him too. Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood was 38 years old and had spent nearly half his life in naval special warfare. 16 years of active duty, 3 Bronze Stars, multiple deployments to locations that would never appear in any public record. He had led teams through operations that most Americans would never hear about, brought every one of his men home from missions where the odds said he shouldn't have, and carried the kind of service record that senior commanders referenced when they talked about what the best looked like. He was returning stateside after a NATO Special Operations Coordination meeting in Stuttgart, Germany. The trip had been scheduled through SOCOM, and his travel orders, stamped and authenticated, placed him on Atlantic Pacific Flight 471 from Frankfurt to Dulles, Seat 3A, first class. Government booked. He wore civilian clothes, a clean, dark Henley, jeans, boots, and a watch his team had given him after a deployment in a place none of them were allowed to name. He carried a leather duffel that held his navy dress blues, his rank insignia, his military ID, and a set of classified travel documents. Nothing about him drew attention. That was by design. SEALs didn't announce themselves. At the gate in Frankfurt, he thanked the boarding agent by name after reading her tag. She smiled. On the jet bridge, an older woman struggled to manage a carry-on and a cane at the same time. Kirkwood took the bag without being asked, walked it to her row, and placed it in the overhead bin. She thanked him. He nodded once and moved on. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just built that way. Quiet, controlled, respectful, the kind of man who handled himself the same way whether he was in a combat zone or a boarding line. Kirkwood reached row 3, stowed his duffel in the overhead compartment, and settled into 3A by the window. He buckled his seatbelt, adjusted the headrest, and pulled a paperback from the seat pocket of his bag before closing his eyes briefly. He looked like any other passenger getting comfortable for a long flight. But from the front galley, Karen Lockhart was already watching. Her eyes tracked him from the moment he turned into the first-class cabin. She watched him open the overhead bin. She watched him sit down. She studied his clothes, his bag, his face. Then she turned to the manifest screen near the galley station and scrolled to seat 3A, Kirkwood, D. She looked at the name. She looked back at the man. Then she leaned toward Colton Pruitt, who was folding hot towels beside her, and lowered her voice. "That's not a first-class passenger. Go check his boarding pass." Pruitt walked over without hesitation. He was polite about it. "Excuse me, sir. Mind if I just verify your boarding pass?" Kirkwood reached into his back pocket and handed it over without a word. Pruitt glanced at it. Seat 3A. Name matched. He walked back to the galley and told Lockhart everything was in order. She barely acknowledged it. People steal upgrades all the time. Could be a system glitch. Keep an eye on him. Pruitt nodded and said nothing. In the first-class cabin, 8 other passengers were already seated. A white man in a sport coat, a couple in matching cashmere, a woman with a designer bag taking up the seat beside her. None of them had been asked for their boarding passes. None of them had been watched from the galley. None of them had been flagged before the doors even closed. 3 hours into the flight, the first beverage service began. Lockhart moved through the first-class cabin with a practiced smile, offering drinks to each row. The couple in cashmere got sparkling water with lime. The man in the sport coat got a whiskey neat. The woman with the designer bag got a glass of champagne. Row 3 got nothing. Lockhart passed Kirkwood's seat without slowing, without making eye contact, without a word. He didn't react immediately. He assumed she would circle back. She didn't. After another 10 minutes, he pressed the call button above his seat. The small chimes sounded in the galley. 14 minutes passed before Lockhart appeared at his row. She looked down at him with an expression that wasn't quite hostility, but wasn't service either. "Can I help you?" "I'd take a water when you get a chance," Kirkwood said. Lockhart tilted her head slightly. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Kirkwood held her gaze for a moment. "Seat 3A. That's where I'm sitting." She brought the water without another word and set it on the armrest without a napkin. 20 minutes later, hot towels were distributed through the cabin. Every passenger received one. Every passenger except Kirkwood. Across the aisle in 3B, a white businessman named Gregory Hale had been watching the pattern develop. He shifted in his seat, glanced at Kirkwood, then at Lockhart, and his discomfort was visible. He said nothing yet, but he was paying attention. Kirkwood put in his earbuds, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He had been treated worse in places far more dangerous than an airplane cabin. He chalked it up to bad service and let it go, but Lockhart wasn't letting anything go. In her mind, she had already decided he didn't belong there. Now she just needed a reason to prove it. 5.5 hours into the flight, Kirkwood unbuckled his seatbelt, stood, and walked toward the forward lavatory. He used it, washed his hands, and stepped back into the aisle. On his way to his seat, he paused near the galley entrance and stretched, rolled his neck, pressed his palms into his lower back. A normal thing for anyone sitting in a pressurized cabin for 6 hours over open ocean. 2 other passengers had done the same thing during the flight. Neither had been noticed. Lockhart noticed Kirkwood. She stood at the galley counter and watched him stretch for fewer than 30 seconds before turning to Colton Pruitt. Her voice was low but urgent. "He's watching us. He's been acting erratic the whole flight. Something's off." Pruitt looked past her toward Kirkwood, who was already walking back toward his seat. He hesitated. He could see a man stretching. He couldn't see a threat, but he said nothing. He didn't ask what specifically was erratic. He didn't challenge the characterization. He looked at Lockhart, then looked at the floor, and stayed silent. That silence gave her everything she needed. Lockhart picked up the interphone connected to the flight deck and pressed the call button. When the captain answered, her language was precise and deliberate. She reported a suspicious and potentially threatening passenger in first class. She said he had been aggressive with crew throughout the flight. She said he was now lingering near the galley in a threatening manner. She used words she knew would trigger a specific response. Aggressive, threatening, lingering. The captain had not seen Kirkwood, had not spoken to him, had not left the flight deck once during the crossing, but Federal Aviation Protocol required him to act on a crew member's threat assessment. He made the call to the air marshals seated in coach. And with that single report, built entirely on fabrication, Lockhart set into motion a sequence of events that could not be undone. Kirkwood was back in his seat, seatbelt fastened, paperback open to page 84, when two men in plain clothes appeared at the edge of his row. They didn't introduce themselves by name. One stood in the aisle, the other positioned himself one row behind. Their jackets were unbuttoned. Their expressions were flat and rehearsed. "Sir, we need you to stand up." Kirkwood looked up from his book. He closed it slowly, placed it in the seat pocket, and stood. His hands were visible at his sides, palms open. His voice was calm and even. "What's this about? You've been identified as a potential threat by a member of the crew. We need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. There's been a mistake." Kirkwood said, "I haven't done anything. Turn around, sir." He complied. He didn't tense. He didn't pull away. He placed his wrists together behind his back the way a man does when he has been trained to survive situations far worse than this one. The cuffs clicked shut. The sound carried through the silent cabin. Every passenger in first class was watching. The woman with the designer bag had her hand over her mouth. The couple in cashmere sat frozen. Gregory Hale leaned forward in 3B. "He hasn't done anything. I've been sitting right here the entire flight. He hasn't said a word to anyone." One of the marshals glanced at Hale. "Sir, please remain seated." A woman 3 rows back raised her phone and began filming. Near the galley curtain, Karen Lockhart stood with her arms crossed, watching. She didn't speak. She didn't intervene. She watched. The marshals walked Kirkwood down the aisle toward the rear of the aircraft. Every row turned as he passed. He was cuffed to an armrest in the last row of coach. He sat down without resistance, without raising his voice. He asked one question, once, clearly. "Can you tell me specifically what I'm accused of?" No one answered. Atlantic Pacific Flight 471 touched down at Dulles International Airport at 4:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Before the seatbelt sign was turned off, before a single passenger stood to reach for their luggage, the forward cabin door opened and 4 figures stepped on board, 2 FBI agents, 2 airport police officers. They walked the length of the aircraft without speaking to anyone and stopped at the last row of coach, where Kirkwood sat cuffed to the armrest, spine straight, eyes forward. They uncuffed him from the seat and recuffed his hands behind his back. Then they walked him up the aisle toward the front of the plane. 212 passengers watched. A father pulled his young daughter closer. A teenager lifted his phone. A woman in row 14 pressed her fingers to her lips and shook her head slowly. Kirkwood didn't look left or right. He kept his chin level and his breathing measured. He walked the way he had been trained to walk under pressure. Controlled, silent, present. They took him through the jet bridge and into the terminal, past the gate area where arriving passengers turned and stared, past the baggage signs and the currency exchange kiosk, and into a windowless federal holding room on the lower level of the airport. Concrete walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, a single fluorescent light humming overhead. They sat him in a chair, removed one cuff, and secured the other to a steel loop welded to the table. His leather duffel, the one containing his Navy dress blues, his military ID, his rank insignia, and his classified travel orders stamped by SOCOM, was taken to another room. Then they left. No one told him why he was there. No one read him his rights. No one asked if he needed water or food or a phone call. He sat in that room for 3 hours and 17 minutes before another human being spoke to him. The silence was deliberate. It was a technique designed to create anxiety, to make people talk, to break composure. It didn't work on Kirkwood. He had completed SEER training, the military's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape program designed to prepare operators for capture and interrogation by hostile forces. He had endured simulated captivity in conditions built to replicate the worst-case scenario. A quiet room at Dulles with a fluorescent light and a metal table didn't come close. He sat perfectly still, controlled his breathing, and waited. 3 hours and 17 minutes after Kirkwood was placed in that room, the door opened. A single FBI agent walked in carrying the leather duffel. He didn't sit down. He didn't introduce himself. He set the bag on the metal table, unzipped it, and began removing the contents one item at a time. First, the Navy dress blues, folded with military precision, creases sharp enough to cut paper. Then the rank insignia, Senior Chief Petty Officer, then the ribbons, 3 bronze stars among them, then the military ID, photo matching the man sitting across from him. Then the travel orders, printed on official letterhead, stamped by United States Special Operations Command, detailing authorized travel from Stuttgart, Germany to Washington, D.C., in connection with a classified NATO coordination meeting. The agent stared at the documents for a long moment. He looked at Kirkwood, he looked back at the orders, then he zipped the bag, picked it up, and walked out of the room without saying a single word. 20 minutes passed. The door opened again. This time, 2 different agents entered. Their posture was different. Their tone was different. Everything about the room shifted. Senior Chief Kirkwood, we need to understand what happened on that flight. Kirkwood was still cuffed to the table. He nodded once and began speaking. His account was precise, clinical, and delivered without emotion or embellishment. Times, seat numbers, names he had overheard, descriptions of each interaction. He recounted the skipped service, the delayed response to his call button, the question about whether he was in the right cabin, the hot towel that never came, the stretch near the galley, the marshals at his row. He delivered it the way a special operator delivers a debrief. Facts only, sequence intact, nothing added, nothing left out. The 2 agents exchanged a look. One of them reached across the table and unlocked the cuff from Kirkwood's wrist personally. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Within the hour, calls were being made to NCIS, to Atlantic Pacific Airlines Corporate Security Division, and to the Pentagon. The investigation moved fast. Federal agents pulled every available piece of evidence from Flight 471, and the picture that emerged was not complicated. It was damning. The passenger's cell phone video, filmed by a woman in row 6, captured the takedown in full. Kirkwood standing calmly, the marshals cuffing him without resistance, Gregory Hale in 3B protesting that the man had done nothing wrong, and Karen Lockhart standing near the galley curtain with her arms folded, watching it all with an expression that the filming passenger would later describe in her written statement as satisfied. The aircraft's internal CCTV told the rest of the story. Cameras captured Lockhart tracking Kirkwood from the moment he boarded. They captured her checking the manifest and leaning toward Colton Pruitt. They captured the first beverage service, where every first-class passenger received a drink except the man in 3A. They captured Lockhart's 1-4-minute delay in responding to his call button. They captured her walking hot towels to every other row and passing his without stopping. They captured Kirkwood standing near the galley for fewer than 30 seconds, stretching his back before returning to his seat. And they captured Lockhart picking up the interphone to the flight deck less than a minute later. The air marshal's own written reports confirmed that Kirkwood had been fully compliant during the encounter. 0 signs of aggression, 0 resistance, 0 verbal hostility. The captain's statement confirmed he had never personally observed any threatening behavior and had acted solely on Lockhart's report over the interphone. When investigators reviewed that report, they found she had never documented a single specific behavior. No description of a threatening act, no mention of a weapon, no articulable reason for concern. Just 2 words used over and over: suspicious, threatening, words that, when cross-referenced with every second of available footage, meant nothing more than a black man sitting in first class. Karen Lockhart was brought into a federal interview room at Dulles 4 hours after the plane landed. She walked in with her shoulders back and her chin raised. She sat down across from the FBI agent with the posture of someone who expected to be thanked. She had reported a threat. She had followed protocol. She had done her job. The agent opened a folder, clicked a pen, and asked a simple question. Describe the specific threatening behavior you observed from the passenger in seat 3A. Lockhart paused for half a second. He was looking around a lot, scanning the cabin, acting nervous. The agent turned a laptop screen toward her and pressed play. The CCTV footage showed Kirkwood reading his book, eyes down, sleeping with his head against the window, looking out at the clouds, sitting still with his earbuds in. Which part of this is scanning the cabin? Lockhart shifted in her seat. He was near the galley, lingering. That's a red flag. The agent checked a printed manifest log. 6 other passengers moved through the galley area during the flight. You didn't report any of them. Why? Lockhart didn't answer immediately. The agent continued. Did you ask any other passenger in first class to verify their boarding pass? No. Did you skip any other passenger during beverage service? No. Did you bypass any other passenger during the hot towel distribution? No. The room was quiet for a long time. Then the agent slid a single printed image across the table. It was a still frame pulled from the cabin CCTV. It showed the moment the air marshals were cuffing Kirkwood in his seat, and in the background, standing near the galley curtain, was Lockhart, arms crossed, watching, smiling. Lockhart stared at the photo. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The confidence that had carried her into that room drained from her face in a single breath. The agent leaned back. He just didn't seem like he belonged in first class. Those were your words on the interphone. Can you explain what that means? Lockhart's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. The call reached Atlantic Pacific Airlines corporate headquarters in Dallas before the sun came up the next morning. By 8 a.m., the executive crisis team had assembled in a closed conference room on the 14th floor. By 9 a.m., every attorney on the airline's in-house legal staff had been pulled from other matters. By noon, the airline's VP of operations had been briefed on the full scope of what had happened on Flight 471, and the internal review that followed made everything worse. 11 formal complaints had been filed against Karen Lockhart over the previous 9 years. Every single one came from a passenger of color. Black travelers reported being asked to prove their seat assignments. A Latino businessman described being told he looked like he was in the wrong cabin. A South Asian woman traveling with her children recalled Lockhart, suggesting she might be more comfortable farther back. 11 complaints. All reviewed internally, all dismissed. Some were marked as resolved with no action. Others were noted as misunderstandings. 2 HR supervisors had signed off on closing the files without a single follow-up interview. Colton Pruitt was interviewed separately. He sat across from investigators with his hands clasped on the table and admitted what the footage already showed. He knew Lockhart's report to the captain was exaggerated. He knew Kirkwood hadn't done anything threatening. He said nothing because she was senior crew, and he was still on probation. I didn't want to make trouble, Pruitt told the investigators. The investigator wrote that down without expression. The Pentagon's response arrived by secure letter the same afternoon. A Department of Defense spokesperson followed with a public statement that left no room for interpretation. An active-duty Special Operations Service member was unlawfully detained based on a fabricated report with clear racial motivation. The department expects full accountability from all parties involved. Within 48 hours, the story reached national media. The headline was everywhere, and inside the airline's headquarters, every person in that conference room understood the same thing. This could not be contained, walked back, or quietly resolved. The terminations began within the week. Karen Lockhart was fired from Atlantic Pacific Airlines for gross misconduct, filing a false threat report against a passenger, racial discrimination in the performance of her duties, and violation of federal aviation regulations governing the reporting of security threats on commercial aircraft. Her crew credentials were revoked. Her access to airline systems was deactivated. Her 6-year career ended not with a retirement ceremony but with a letter hand-delivered by corporate counsel in the presence of 2 witnesses. Colton Pruitt was suspended immediately and placed under internal investigation for failure to intervene and for corroborating a report he knew to be false. He resigned 3 weeks later before the investigation concluded. His resignation letter was one sentence. The airline's head of crew training was removed from her position after the internal review revealed that no module in the company's training curriculum addressed racial bias in threat assessment or the legal consequences of filing false security reports. 2 HR supervisors, the same 2 who had signed off on dismissing 11 prior complaints against Lockhart without investigation, were placed on administrative leave pending a full audit of their case handling. Neither would return to their roles. But the most significant consequence came from outside the airline. The FBI formally referred Lockhart's case to the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. The referral cited potential federal charges related to filing a knowingly false report on a commercial aircraft, a violation of federal law carrying a maximum sentence of up to 20 years in prison. Lockhart, who had walked into her FBI interview expecting to be thanked, now faced the possibility of a federal indictment. Atlantic Pacific Airlines issued a public apology 72 hours after the story broke nationally. It was 4 paragraphs long, carefully worded by legal counsel, and avoided using the words racism, discrimination, or wrongful. The public response was immediate and uniform. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close. Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood retained a civil rights attorney within 2 weeks of the incident. The lawsuit was filed in federal court, and it named 3 defendants. Karen Lockhart, individually, Atlantic Pacific Airlines, and the airline's corporate parent company. The complaint alleged racial discrimination, false imprisonment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The evidence attached to the filing was overwhelming. Multi-angle CCTV footage from the aircraft showing every interaction between Lockhart and Kirkwood. Cell phone video from a passenger capturing the arrest and Lockhart watching from the galley. Written statements from Gregory Hale and 4 other first-class passengers confirming that Kirkwood had been singled out. The air marshal's reports confirming full compliance and 0 aggression. The captain's statement confirming he had acted solely on Lockhart's characterization and had never observed anything himself. And the complete record of 11 prior complaints against Lockhart, every one from a passenger of color, every one dismissed without meaningful action. But it was the discovery phase that broke the case open entirely. Internal emails between airline supervisors revealed conversations that no jury would forgive. One manager had described Lockhart as old school but harmless. Another had responded to a complaint from a black passenger by writing, "Some people are just too sensitive about this stuff. File it and move on." A third email, sent after one of the dismissed complaints, read, "Karen's been here 14 years. She's not going anywhere over a hurt feeling." The airline's legal team saw what was coming. The case never reached trial. Atlantic Pacific Airlines settled for $6.5 million, $3.8 million in compensatory damages, covering false imprisonment, emotional distress, reputational harm, and lost duty time. $2.7 million in punitive damages assessed against both the airline and Lockhart individually. As part of the settlement, the airline agreed to implement mandatory anti-bias training for all cabin crew, establish an independent review board for discrimination complaints with authority to override internal HR decisions, and install enhanced cabin monitoring systems on all aircraft to ensure that future incidents would be recorded from every angle. The money was significant, the reforms were structural, but for Kirkwood, The settlement was never about either. It was about the record. Senior Chief Darnell Kirkwood returned to duty the following Monday. He reported to his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command, sat through a formal debrief on the incident, and was told one thing that mattered more to him than any settlement figure. You handled yourself with the discipline and restraint expected of a SEAL, not just on that flight, through every part of what came after. Kirkwood nodded once. That was enough. He didn't give interviews. He didn't release a statement. He didn't post on social media or accept invitations to appear on cable news panels that wanted him to sit under studio lights and relive the worst moment of his civilian life for ratings. He let the record speak. The footage, the filings, the outcome, quietly, without press coverage or public announcement, he used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal assistance fund for active duty service members and veterans who faced racial discrimination during travel. The fund provided attorney referrals, documentation support, and direct financial assistance to those who couldn't afford to fight back on their own. He never put his name on it. 7 months after Flight 471, Kirkwood boarded another transatlantic flight, first class, same airline. He walked down the jet bridge, turned into the cabin, and stowed his duffel in the overhead bin. A flight attendant greeted him at his row with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard. Can I get you anything before takeoff?" He shook his head. "I'm fine, thank you." He sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and opened a book. No one checked his boarding pass. No one watched him from the galley. No one questioned whether he belonged in his own seat. Back at Atlantic Pacific Airlines Training Center in Dallas, a new module had been added to the mandatory crew certification program. It opened with a single image displayed on a projection screen. A still frame from the cabin CCTV of Flight 471. It showed a black man being handcuffed in seat 3A by 2 federal air marshals. And in the background, near the galley curtain, a flight attendant standing with her arms crossed, smiling. Beneath the image, one line in plain black text, "This cost us $6.5 million. It should have cost us nothing." No names were printed on the slide. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. If this story moved you, don't just watch in silence. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to see what happens when racism meets accountability at 35,000 feet. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.